everybody, it's me, Laura, and today I'm back with another set of jewelry, and this is my pumpkin vintage jewelry, and we're going to be using those same kind of frame cutters that we had done before on the last video, except this time around, instead of doing the blue set, I figured, yeah, let's go ahead and do the green one. So the difference here is on the last set, they were cut completely, well, I should say, they weren't completely cut through in the center. And you could tell from the one set here that I'm going to be working with, the one that I'm just going to start, we're going to work with this set where the center part has been completely cut through, and I'm going to be bringing in some of my little silver eye pins. We're going to go ahead and back this first. I wanted to get this part done. But before I start doing that, I want to prep the frames. So I had put a little bit of that green on the clay already after it had been baked, but I wanted to finish it up by doing the inside of the frame, making sure it was completely, painted up where it has that nice little green finish. And then I'm also going to do the outside of the frame as well. Now, once I got that paint, or I should say that metallic marker paint, all the way around on those frames, I'm going to be bringing in some black clay here. It has been rolled out on a number 4 setting on my Atlas pasta machine. We'll bring those eye pins back in, and I've curled them up so that they're just very, very tiny. I had to cut them pretty short and then curled them up with my Needlenose pliers. And then we're going to take that, you place it right at the top there, and then I'm bringing in my super glue, and I'll use a little bit of my liquid clay to go ahead and adhere this frame to the, you might say, the unbaked clay. Now, I know some of you are like, well, wait a minute, and if it's your first time here, when it comes to me, I do this where I use both the liquid clay and the super glue, and the reason why I do that is because I like to use my needle tool, which I will be doing, to cut out my hard piece onto the unbaked clay. And you're probably wondering, well, why not just go ahead and use the cutter? Well, the problem is with using the cutter, at least in my mind, every time I've used the actual cutter of that, whatever the object is, and I want to go ahead and back it, and it's going to be unbaked clay against that hard. Once I put this back down onto that unbaked clay, like when I try to adhere it, it doesn't always meet up correctly. In other words, sometimes the piece might be off a little bit. I don't know how to describe it to you guys. So to me, it's just easier to go ahead and use my needle tool to get a nice cut all the way around the object in question and just enjoy it that way. It's just easier, it's faster for me. Go figure. I don't know. If you like to cut out the piece from the original cutter, then go ahead. Absolutely go ahead and do that. Everybody to each his own, as they say. But again, I'm just doing that. And you'll notice here I had a little bit of liquid clay and a little bit of super glue that kind of peeked on through underneath the frame. I took out my little pointed Q-tip and then just took that up, any excess from that with that Q-tip, and it worked just fine. Now, once I get both of these frames put down, we're going to go ahead and bake this thing at 275 degrees for about 7 to 10 minutes. You could go a little longer if you want, and depending upon where you live, you might want to go ahead and do that anyway. Now, once you have these things completely baked through, and here's the thing, they don't have to be completely baked. You could go ahead and still do this at this point where the frames are not baked yet. Create 2 little orange balls, both being about the same diameter. This thing winds up being just under 1/2 inch in diameter. So make sure that, and then, oh yeah, so 1 centimeter. There you go. Or, yeah. Sorry, I'm not good on metric. I try, but I'm not always that great with it. Anyway, then bring in another clay ball, another orange one, and make sure it's about the same diameter as the other one. Once you have that, you're going to flatten these down into these little circular discs like I have right here. You'll then bring in, once you have them where they look about the same, you'll bring in your needle tool and you'll start to create little lines like you would so that it would look like a pumpkin. Little vertical lines at an angle so they're kind of a little bit rounded and come from one point on there. So like right here you can see I'm coming right off of the center and just creating a few little lines into this orange piece representing one of our first pumpkins. Now once you have the pumpkin lines all set into these two pieces, you're going to lift them up with your blade off of your tile, and you're going to just set them into each of these frames right on the bottom. And you just gently place it in there, try to push it in slightly. You don't want to have those lines come off. And if it doesn't look like if there's just black at the bottom there, that's okay, it can show through. You know, I like to have a little bit of that where it's showing through anyway because it gives you opportunity to place other things in there. And I will be, when it comes to the cutters here on the frames, I used a few other cutters in my leaves, and I want to say I've used a couple other little features, and I used some micro cutters. I'll put the link to that particular cutter set in my description area, so if you're wondering, okay, where did she get this? You can go there. Anyway, like I said, I'm reinforcing my lines here now, and I'm getting that nice little pumpkin kind of look. And then I'm going to come in with some dark brown clay, and we're going to create two little tiny little logs, very tiny, but tailored at, or I should say, created into a little point on one end, and then place them in at the top of your little pumpkins. Now, once you get those tiny little handles on each pumpkin, you're going to come in with some Skinner blend. It's a very, it's a magenta to yellow Skinner blend. And this Skinner blend, I only used a little bit of clay, not a ton, because you really don't need a lot, okay? And this was rolled out pretty thin. I want to say like a 5 or 6 on my Atlas pasta machine. And I'm using the very tiny little micro cutters by Tainsky. And this set, I love this set. Oh my goodness, I love this set. Now, with that being said though, here's the thing. I went back in to go and check and see if they have those cutters still offered up online, and they don't. I can't seem to find them. So I would say go with Keoker or go with another set, but look for the micro cutters. I'm sure you'll find a set that will have either the acorn thing, which I'm going to be using, and the leaf kind of feature, which also I'll be using in this set of earrings. Anyway, as you can tell here, I'm taking the leaf set and I'm using my baby powder, or you can use baking soda also to go ahead and use as a release agent. And I'm going to be cutting out a bunch of different little leaves here on that blend. I thought I really needed a nice blend, and so this comes in really handy. Look for a really nice set of micro cutters and use them into a magenta yellow blend to get the kind of leaves you really like. Now once I get the leaves cut out here in the magenta and yellow blend, I also bring in my dark green to cut out some more regular kinds of leaves with these same micro cutters. I also had an acorn feature here, and so I brought in my dark brown clay to go ahead and cut out a couple of those. I also create a little bit of a vine thing into these earrings. So at this point, I've taken these earrings and I've already baked them at 275 degrees for about 7 to 10 minutes. You can go a little longer, especially if you're not in a high desert altitude like I am, pretty dry here. It'll probably take you longer to bake them anyway. And then what I did was once I have these cooled off, I'm bringing in my paints. And my paints are these are folk art acrylic paints. So I'm using my chocolate brown, glam gold, radiant copper, and my peridot. So those are the four that I eventually use. I also go back in eventually and I use a little bit of my black matte acrylic paint as well. Once in a while I need to do that. And I just figure, you know, it's like, okay, for details and for touch up, I sometimes do that. The other thing I use in these earrings and on both sets, and yes, you guys are going to see it, my Posca, yes, she's back again. My little 0.7 millimeter white paint Posca, I love that thing. And so I use a little bit of dotting, if you will, and very, very tiny. I think that's why I like that particular paint pen so well, because it's got such a tiny nib. You could do just a tiny little, just touch. And it will give you the perfect dot every time. At least in my book it does. So if not, you can always go in, and I'm using here, when I'm doing this, I'm using a 10-aught brush. I go with a very tiny, tiny brush when I'm painting in all of these details. Okay, so now we're going to tackle our second set of pumpkin earrings, and I'm bringing in that black, and this again has been rolled out on the number 4 setting. You can go a little thicker, but I really like to keep my my clay a little bit thin here. And you'll notice with these long oval kind of vintage cutters, or I should say vintage earring set that I'm doing now, you'll notice on this set of framed pieces that I'm using, they're not completely cut through. The first set, yeah, you had that oval right in the center. It was completely cut through, whereas this set is not going to have that. Instead, I'm using the oval frame, or I should say the oval cutter that came with this set, cutting 2 separate pieces, and we're just going to build the pumpkin set right off of these 2 black pieces. And then once I get this built up, I'll then make sure I bake these 2 little pieces once they're built up, and I'm going to be putting in the pumpkins and everything else on them. But once I get them built up, I'll bake them at 275 degrees for about 7 to 10 minutes. And right here, I wanted to show a difference though from the first set to this set. The first set, we did have to kind of hand do our pumpkins. This time around, I'm bringing in with my Tainsky stud cutters. There was a nice little pumpkin in here that I just liked. I thought, let's go ahead and use it. It worked great. It fit right into the frame set and everything. So I'm using that. I'll go back and I'll get the micro set, and that will finish it off just perfectly, along with maybe a little bit of vinage with my dark brown. We'll just have to see. But anyway, I'll complete up this set. I'll bake them, and then once those 2 pieces are baked, I'll bring in my liquid polymer clay, and I'll adhere that into the original vintage frames that I've already set aside that have already been baked, and rebake it again. With this all said, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to let you guys watch my hands talk as I complete up this second set of vintage pumpkin earrings. All right, so at this point, both sets of earrings have been completely baked through, and I'm bringing back in those metallic paints of mine. And as I was kind of doing the details, if you will, on this particular set, where I was adding into the leaf and a little bit on the pumpkins using that radiant copper and so on, I was looking at the frame and I thought, I want to do something more to make these really shine, really pop, right? And the green is great. You could go purely with this, but you know me, it's like I'm always like trying to find a way to make a nicer presentation or look to it. So the more I started doing this, the more I thought, what if we added a little bit of a different color to the frames themselves? And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, yeah, we need to do that. So after I got done putting the radiant copper into the little pumpkin, adding in a little bit of that glam gold to the actual leaves and so on, I looked at that inner part of the frame and thought, we need to add something in here. So using my 10-aught brush, I came in with that radiant copper because I wanted something to really pop. And the radiant copper was pretty much my brightest color here amongst all of them. I didn't want the green too close to that greenish blue that I was using on the frame naturally. So I wanted something that would really stand out. And that radiant copper was my wish, my godsend, my thing. So with that 10-aught brush, I very, very delicately went along on the inner little ring there and painted it in. And it made a huge difference in the end. Once I got that completely taken care of though, the last thing I always come in with, again, is that Posca. And yep, this is where I'm going to start to use it. So I went along on the pumpkins themselves, a little bit on the leaves, whatever, wherever I wanted to place little tiny dots and just add a special little extra detailed feature to these earrings, and it worked great. Once I finish up with my Posca, I then come in and on both sets of earrings, I'm going to varnish them. And then once I get the varnish in and I let that dry, I'll come back in with a little bit of super glue and my pointed back clear rhinestones and place a few rhinestones in on this, bring in my jewelry findings, put that all together and finish it up. So from here, one more time, I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to let you guys watch my hands talk as I finish up this second set and the first set of my vintage pumpkin earrings. All right, so this is the end result of creating my vintage pumpkin framed earrings. Please use this for study and reference. And if you like this video, please bop the like button, subscribe, and leave me a comment. I'm always wondering what you're thinking. Otherwise, I am sending out my biggest hugs to each of you, and I hope you have a fantastic day.